to click. Tracy, you teed it up really well. Thank you for that. Hello to everybody. I'm Heather. I see a few brothers and sisters on the line too. So bit aninishle do bilagana bashichin, tradichini deshiche do bilagana dashanella. And at Change Labs, we specialize in supporting entrepreneurs in our community with navigating the business regulatory environment that governs Navajo lands. And to Tracy's point, most Americans don't know that Native American entrepreneurs operating on reservations are governed by a completely different set of rules. And in my mind, these rules are established to undermine the small business owner. And it's actually not just in my mind, I think it's fact. The Navajo Nation government was established in 1923 with the discovery of oil on Navajo land. And the government was established to meet the demands of oil companies. And to this day, we struggle with the impacts of extractive economies undermining the startup and growth of small businesses. So I do hate to kick off, all negative, but I do want to make sure that I am getting us all on the same page when it comes to the stats. So if the Navajo Nation was a US state, we'd be the poorest state in the US, with 43% of our residents living below the poverty line and a reported 50% unemployment. That's what our Navajo Nation President, Jonathan Nez's estimate. And these stats were pre-pandemic, by the way. I would argue that the biggest contributor to poverty rates and unemployment is the fact that we have so few established small businesses. When you look at the rest of the country, 60 to 80% of net new jobs are coming from the small business sector. Navajo Nation spans New Mexico and Arizona and a sliver of Utah, where more than 95% of employment is attributed to small businesses. But on Navajo, our small business growth is less than half of the US growth rate. And as a result, more than half of the money earned on the Navajo Nation ends up being spent off the reservation. And besides perpetuating unemployment and poverty, the lack of businesses on Navajo also just completely decimates our economy. We're heavily reliant on border towns for food, supplies, entertainment, education. The Navajo Nation Division of Economic Development estimates that 219 million is lost annually in sales tax revenue to Flagstaff, Winslow, Page, Farmington, Holbrook, and Gallup. So what I wanted to talk about today is why this is the case. And this presentation is going to be very negative. So I want to say now that for every negative stat and story that I share, there's an equal and opposite story of perseverance, resourcefulness, and pride. Entrepreneurs on Navajo are innovative by force. To operate a business here requires ingenuity and tenacity, and we are up for the challenge. But today I want you all to be able to explain to your friends and family members, the next time you're driving up to the Grand Canyon or Monument Valley, why you don't see any local or culturally cognizant businesses once you're on the reservation, why you see so many roadside vendors, and why, when it's possible, that you stop and buy burritos from the lady sitting outside the chapter house instead of going over to McDonald's. But let's start with this very basic question. Why is it so difficult to start a business on the Navajo Nation? So Navajo is the largest tribal landmass in the US, 27,000 square miles, so roughly the same size as West Virginia. I think it's hard for anybody to imagine why our entrepreneurs can't access land, because there's so much of it. But there is some harsh and cruel realities when it comes to finding a place to run your business. First off, most of our land is too rugged, too remote for development. Only 18% of our roads are paved. It costs about $25,000 per mile to lay electricity. And secondly, more than 90% of our land belongs to the US government, held in trust by the BIA. And just a small fraction, less than 1%, is private land that can be developed like any land that you would find off the reservation. So to access land anywhere on the res means you have to apply for a business site lease. And this is a process established by the BIA. It has 25 plus distinct steps, and it requires a minimum of a year to complete. And some of the businesses in our community have been waiting for years for their site lease to process. And most people just don't bother, which is why you see so many roadside vendors and informal flea markets across the res. And finally, just to make things a little bit more impossible, much of the reservation is also subject to grazing rights held by legacy sheep and cattle ranchers. And these guys have veto power over any development, and also zero incentive to give away their land to a small business owner. So even if you had the luxury of time and resources to navigate the land issues, entrepreneurs have to be emotionally ready for how their family and community members respond to their ideas. There is no word in Navajo for business or entrepreneur. And when we've surveyed people who are enrolled in an entrepreneurship class to give us their thoughts on these words, a slight majority of them will report a negative perception. And these are people enrolled to become entrepreneurs. An entrepreneur is associated with greed, with white culture, one who takes advantage of others. And as a result, entrepreneurs in our community are constantly walking this fine line between progression and tradition. Businesses that are enrolled in Change Labs programs are constantly harmonizing traditional values with mainstream business practices. Every decision must not just consider how you generate profit, but how do you do that without offending elders, without sacrificing sacred ways or destroying lands. Our community members invest so much emotional energy towards making sure their businesses are run in a culturally sensitive way, which means, they have to think about how to put the community ahead of their own business. Okay, so we've established that entrepreneurs can't own their land that their buildings are built on if they can never access land in the first place. But this applies to your home as well. This means that most people living on the reservation have no assets other than their vehicle. And that makes it nearly impossible to get a traditional loan. But first, you'd have to find a bank because we only have 4 on Navajo. Imagine just 4 banks across all of West Virginia. Imagine traveling for hours to the bank to try and secure a loan when you don't have any collateral. So for decades, Native businesses have been excluded from national and global economies due to the lack of internet infrastructure. Census data suggests that just over half of Native people have internet access, but most of them are getting it through their smartphone. And we see the impact of this on businesses in our community. So we ran an informal survey back in 2018, and only 8% of the businesses we talked to reported having any online presence. And most of the businesses that enroll in our business incubator come in asking for help setting up a website. But the challenge to all of this is that even if we could build them the best website in the world, their lack of connectivity makes it challenging for them to even respond to their online customers quickly. And also, most of the entrepreneurs that we work with, this would be their first time with a website or any online presence. Keep in mind the median age of entrepreneurs in our programs is 37. So there's a learning curve to all of this. Some of these entrepreneurs barely have email. So to teach them how to maintain a site and then online inventory requires a pretty significant leap in digital and tech literacy. My co-founder, Jessica, and I, we've spent 6 years now documenting and categorizing the challenges that Native entrepreneurs face. So if any of you are interested in geeking out on anything that I just went through, last year we released our first research report on the state of doing business on Navajo using an established set of indicators developed by the World Bank that measures the ease of doing businesses in 190 nations around the globe. And analyzing that data reveals that the Navajo Nation ranks amongst the worst 15% of nations in the world for doing business. So we're proudly on par with Central African Republic. And the most challenging thing about Change Labs work, I would say, is that there isn't any one thing that needs to be fixed. The Navajo entrepreneurial ecosystem is complex, it's layered, and when we map it out, it looks a little bit like this. Some of these challenges are more prominent than others, but what we learned is that, like any complex system, it's difficult to change just one of these levers and expect all of them to improve. To really affect change requires a holistic approach, which is why when you look at orgs like Change Labs, we don't have the luxury to focus on just one thing. We're the only entrepreneurship support organization serving our community. We don't have an SBDC, we don't have a Chamber of Commerce. And so our solutions, character-based loans to vendors, artisans, and business owners, our business incubator, co-working space, they're diverse, and our programs are designed so that we're trying to move all the levers at the same time. And this yields some good success, but this really needs to be done at scale across the entire Navajo and Hopi nations. And it needs to be coupled to meaningful pro-business policy change. All those rules established in 1923 that make it nearly impossible for entrepreneurs to access land and therefore limit their ability to grow or access financing, all of that needs to be abolished. And in the meantime, we have to continue to find ways to enable entrepreneurs to leapfrog those challenges and build a robust community of business owners that will help that next generation think differently about what it means to be an entrepreneur. So one solution I wanted to promote today that overlaps with the Digital Divide Challenge is Res Rising. It's an initiative that we launched in early 2019. I mentioned earlier how many of our business owners report that they have little to no online presence, and yet the majority of them also rely on their business as their sole source of income. The invisibility of these businesses perpetuates some of these big challenges around exclusion that we have on the res. And really, it's hard to believe that entrepreneurs are everywhere when you're driving across the vacant lands of the Navajo Nation. But if you look, they're there. They're selling coal at the intersection. They're slinging fry bread outside their home. They're going to their friends and families' homes to cut hair. And that's the irony to all of this, really, is that Native people are, in fact, hyper entrepreneurial, innate problem solvers. But it's not always a trait that we honor or even recognize in ourselves. And that goes for our leadership too. I don't think that they recognize vendors and artisans for what they are. We seem to hold this very singular definition of a business owner, meaning that if you don't have a logo, if you don't have a storefront, if you don't speak English or wear a suit and tie, then you must not be a business owner. So in many ways, our role is like, let's show people what Native entrepreneurs look like. Let's help people find them. And Res Rising is our digital database of Native-owned small businesses operating across the Southwest. And for about 50% of the 630 businesses listed there, it's their first time having any online presence. You can find diaspora natives there. You can find some of these more remote businesses that are probably only accustomed to cash-only transactions. Res Rising is our answer to this invisibility issue because business growth begins with visibility. We need to help businesses who want to grow find an incremental way to get online, to get beyond just selling to their families and their friends, to selling, just outside their region, to the whole reservation, to the state of Arizona. And we need to make it easy to find businesses by chapter or by community so that we can start to visualize and collect that data on how many of us there actually are out there. So the next time you're looking for sushi in Tuba City, that actually exists, and it's the best sushi I've ever had in my life. There's a food truck run by Carlos Steele. It's called Alternative Eats. It's parked outside the Chevron station. But really, there's hundreds of business owners like him that are seeking opportunities. They're seeking work, especially nowadays. And you won't find them on Google Business or Yelp because those mainstream platforms require a physical mailing address or a website to verify your identity. And we just don't have those things on Navajo. So I hope that I was able to give you all a sense of the hurdles that Navajo entrepreneurs are leaping every day in order to keep going. I know that we at Change Labs are continuously iterating, continuously prototyping new ideas to help people make those leaps. Thank you for having me, and thank you for your attention.